And we are live. Wow, that was a fun intro. I was just playing around a little bit with the options here in StreamYard and figured out that I could do a 30-second countdown. So you all just enjoyed a very nice countdown. And here we are for the first episode of What's New in Prisma. And I'm here with my colleague, Ryan. This thing that we're doing today here is an experiment. It's a new kind of format that we want to introduce in an effort of doing more live streams at Prisma and talking more to the community, talking to you. So this is an experiment. We don't know what it's going to look like in the next couple of episodes. And today we are kind of aiming for 30 minutes of content around the Prisma ecosystem and the community. For example, we'll talk about the latest Prisma 2.4 release that just happened 2 days ago and the features that were introduced there. But then we also want to talk about a couple of cool community projects. For example, there was one Prisma community member who just built an app that made it to #1 on Hacker News. And you shouldn't want to miss which app that was. And we'll talk about it at the end of the stream right before the Q&A. Speaking of Q&A, you can ask questions. For that, you can just use the YouTube chat. And at the end, Ryan and I will take 5 minutes or so to pick the questions that have been asked in the chat and respond to those live here on air. Cool. So who are we actually? Do you want to start by maybe introducing yourself, Ryan?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Ryan Schenke. I am a developer advocate, developer relations here at Prisma, focusing a lot on GraphQL, but of course, all things Prisma as well. And I'm pretty new on the scene. This is into month number 2 now, so I can't believe it's been a month already, but I just started back in early July, and I'm excited to be here. There's lots of really great stuff going on at Prisma, and I've been a huge fan of the product forever. So being part of the team now is amazing, and that's a little bit about me.
Very cool. Yeah, and I have to say we are super excited to have you on board. Like already in the first couple of weeks, I think we had great interactions, and you were kind of doing a lot of very cool stuff. So definitely great to have you on board. Quick introduction about myself. So my name is Nicholas Burke, and I lead the developer success team here at Prisma, really making sure that everybody who uses Prisma is able to reach their goals. And most of the times, that is building applications. So I'm kind of trying to help you with whatever issues you have when you do that. And you just mentioned, Ryan, that it was your first month at Prisma, and maybe to smoothly start this episode today, were there any things during your first month, during your first couple of weeks here at Prisma and the company that like really surprised you or excited you, that you found special in any way? Be it about the tools, maybe you were super surprised by like something you found out about the actual tools, or maybe just about the company.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are a couple things come to mind. One of them is, I mean, I've been plugged into the Prisma ecosystem sort of in some ways for a long time. Like I've used the product even back to the GraphQL days, but not super into the community or the ecosystem. And now that I am plugged in, it's really awesome to see like how vibrant the community around Prisma is. It seems like there is just tons of excitement, lots of stuff going on in the wider community and ecosystem, and that's really cool to see. It's awesome to see like how intrigued community members are about the product, following it through its iterations over the past few years, and now being at this awesome place that we're at with Prisma too. So the community aspect of it has been awesome. Company wise, I mean, everybody's just been great. There's been, if I'm surprised by anything, it's just I guess how welcoming it has been. I expected warm welcomes and everything like that, but I've been pleasantly surprised by just how awesome everyone has been. So that's been really cool to see, and the culture is just awesome. So I'm super excited, pleasantly surprised, and very happy to be here.
Cool. Yeah, absolutely. Likewise, we are excited to have you on board. And one quick note also regarding the culture, like might be interesting for people watching this, is that we are currently turning into a remote first company. So before like Corona, we were kind of headquartered here in our office in Berlin, where I'm also at the moment. But in the future, we are actually becoming kind of a remote first company so that everybody is really flexible to work from wherever they want. And we'll still keep the office here in Berlin, though, as kind of the central place where we do gatherings. Actually, today we have a barbecue, and I think like most of my colleagues are already downstairs enjoying some nice salad and other kind of things from the grill. But we are not here to talk about barbecues. We are here to talk about Prisma. So why don't we start by talking about the latest Prisma release? Have you actually like followed the release, Ryan? What are your kind of initial like impressions about it?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So definitely the things that I've been checking out in the latest release most prominently have been this new order by, the way that order by works now. So order by, if you want to make a database query and you want to order your results in a certain fashion, ascending or descending by a certain field, you can do that on multiple fields now. And that's a really key feature. We've got a lot of feedback that has said, this is something that people really want to see in the Prisma client. They want to be able to order by multiple fields. And so I think that's huge. I've been playing around with that, and I'm excited that has landed. The other stuff, which we'll talk about too, prefixes, the dollar prefix, and the new studio features. Haven't dug into those as much, but perhaps you can speak to those a little bit more.
Yes, absolutely. So like while you were talking, I already kind of opened up the release notes for the 2.4 release right here. And we now quickly just want to talk through these features. And I'm actually going also to do a quick demo to show how the syntax works. And in fact, what's interesting about this feature is that we already adjusted the syntax and made this, instead of an object, we made it an array where you pass in the objects for sorting like one by one and in order. We'll talk about that change in a second as well. Then we have another kind of big change in the Prisma client API, where we're introducing a prefix for all top-level client methods. So for those kind of methods on your Prisma client instance that are not kind of direct queries to the database for a specific model, we introduced this prefix. And the reason for that is mostly that we had more and more name clashes with kind of reserved words and terms that you couldn't use in your Prisma schema, the more we extended the developer surface of Prisma client. So now that we remove that, we free up a couple of more names that you can use again, like as models. For example, we had users who complained that they couldn't use the word transaction because transaction is a preview function, a top-level function on Prisma client. And we'll see what you have to do there in order to update. Then we have some updates in Prisma Studio that we want to talk about, and just a reminder of the current preview features that we have already available for you. So I don't know how you typically do it when you need a playground for Prisma, Ryan, but what I do is I'm using the Prisma examples repo. And specifically in that Prisma examples repo, we have an example folder that's called TypeScript script. And really what this is, it's kind of the most bare bones TypeScript project with Prisma setup that you could imagine. So in terms of dependencies, it really only has the latest Prisma dependencies right here. In fact, because I want to show what features looked like before the upgrade, I'm changing this to version 2.3 again before I'm installing the dependencies. And then we have a very plain TypeScript setup in here, and then also some code that I don't even need. So I'm going to delete that for now. And
that's set up there though to seed a database once you get this wired up. Is that the idea?
Yes and no. In fact, the SQLite database that is part of this project already has a couple of entries. Okay. To reveal and find her. So yes, it is also seeding, but it also has some more example calls to the database. But if we check this, then we see that there already is one user and one post in the sample database. So we start with a little bit of sample data, but you're totally right that if I had executed the script, then I now would have more data in the database. So So first I want to show you the new functionality for ordering by multiple fields. And to do so, I first, of course, have to install the dependencies so that all the errors here go away and I have access to my Prisma client. And here is what the feature looked like in the 2.3 version. So I'm just going to show you how you can query a list of posts, define many query, and then provide the order by. And here we can explore how we can order things. And I just want to order alphabetically by the title and want to do it in a descending way. And now you'll notice that I can provide more properties to this. So I could say, okay, first I want to order by content, by title, but if there are two posts that have the same title, then I want to order by the content, so that I still follow an order. If I do that, however, and try to run this, I believe it's going to yell at me, and it's going to tell me that I cannot do that because I provided title and content, but I can choose only one. So the API here is not really enforcing that rule in version 2.3, but if I did this, now we can see that the data is coming back. Of course, it's sorted. It's only one item. But that's kind of like what it looks like in Prisma 2.3. But what you couldn't do in Prisma 2.3 is have that additional sorting property, or like even more additional like sorting properties. If we had a created ad and updated ad field on the post model, then you might want to sort by these dates as well. But that all was not possible in 2.3. So let's go ahead and update to version 2.4.1, which is the latest version. To be sure, I'm just removing my modules and reinstalling everything so that it has the latest version. And going back into the script, we now see, actually I'm going to make sure and restart the TypeScript server. And now this should be taking an array where I can provide multiple properties to sort from. So now we can do this, what I described before. We order first by the title, and if there are two posts that have the same title, then we order by the content. Testing this.
Boom.
It's not super interesting. Yeah, it's sorted. one post is sorted. But like so far,
I'll now sort you by both.
This feature.
So you touched on it a bit earlier, but what's key here to point out, I think, would be the array syntax. That's going to be of interest to a lot of people. And what folks will find too is if you install 2.4.0, you will not have this array syntax for your multiple order buys, but at 2.4.1 you will. And the reason we've got this now, this new syntax in here, has to do with you know more of the story, Niko, but it has to do with certain ways that tooling will interfere with reordering objects, I believe, reordering the properties of objects. And I guess it's ESLint, right? That's the deal. Is yes. It will, if you're running ESLint, it's going to potentially change the order of your properties as they show up in your object, which is no good for this situation when you want to have certain precedents for your ordering. So we've now got this array syntax. Anything more to say on that, Niko?
I think you made that pretty clear. Yeah, we had this issue with kind of ESLint, which would indeed reorder the properties of objects, and because we cannot rely on that order in that sense, we were introducing that change in the syntax, introducing the array syntax, where the order is now clear because arrays are inherently ordered.
Yeah, the syntax itself, it would be awesome if we didn't have this issue of having these properties reordered, because the array syntax feels like, it feels a little bit nicer to be able to just plop them into an object, but to do this safely, this is probably the syntax you want is the array syntax. Something that came to mind for me, maybe this, is if you don't provide any kind of order by when you do a find many, what's the default order that results will come back in?
That's a good question. I can't really tell you. I could imagine that it's maybe by default ordered by ID.
By ID, I think I'm wondering if that's it, because I was playing around to do some content up, and the order that I got, if I didn't provide an order by, was a different order than the results were, in my database. I might expect that, right? Like the order that they're in the database from when they first went in, perhaps they come back in that order, but not in this case. I think it may be by ID. It was a little bit unclear what the default would be there.
But like, were you using CUIDs or UUIDs or like auto-incrementing integers?
CUIDs I was using.
Okay, well, in that case, yeah, could make sense. But I don't know. Would be interesting to figure that out. But anyhow, talking about the next big change in the 2.4 release, we already have a hint here about it in the terminal, in the output. It says that the Prisma Disconnect method is deprecated, and I should use Prisma $disconnect. So like that's exactly what we talked about initially, that we're changing all the top-level Prisma client methods to use a $ prefix, but we're not going to do that as kind of like a breaking change in this version. Instead, you'll get time to update these for a couple of more releases, and then eventually we'll remove the non-$ prefix version completely, and also remove the deprecation warning. But for now, we'll just show you this warning so that you are aware, and whenever it suits you, you can just go and update it.
And that's all there is to that change, hey? Is like just you add the $ prefix and everything continues to operate as normal?
Exactly. And it's also a pretty small change considering how kind of few top-level Prisma client methods we even have. So if you're using any of these, then like you should be aware. But otherwise, I think if you're just using the normal queries to query your models, I think you don't really have to worry about anything.
And that's just to reiterate, that's because if you had in your Prisma model something called query raw as a model, right? Then when you use the Prisma client, you're going to end up with collisions there in the names of those methods.
Exactly. And in fact, we have an open issue in the Prisma documentation repo to document the reserved model names. But what I actually did today in the docs, because the questions about reserved words have been coming up over and over. So I'm just going to show you a little thing that you like, where you can today already look up the reserved words. We don't have them properly documented yet, but you can read kind of the code where they're implemented. This, of course, is not good. I don't know how that wrong link made it in there. This is from the Rust implementation, and here you see a number of different terms that are currently not allowed in the Prisma schema. Cool. Enough about that, but I want to stay in my browser because I quickly want to show you what the new version of Studio looks like. So if you go to prisma.studio, you'll find the online version of Prisma Studio, which is our GUI for your database, basically, where you can browse your data. And it has seen a little bit of a makeover. So it has a little bit of a new layout. If you want to add a new model, you now have this list of models, and you can search for a model here. So I can search for a region, and then I can open it up. And interestingly, if you look at the release notes, these also say that we removed a couple of features. And the reason why we did that is because we're working towards a stable version of Studio and therefore needed to reduce the scope of it a little bit. It was not that we didn't like the features or even that we don't want to bring them back. I'm pretty sure that we'll bring back some like some form of the code editor or the tree view that we already had in previous versions. But it was just too much effort to keep them in the initial stable version that we were currently aiming for. So that's why we removed them kind of temporarily. But I'm pretty convinced that if they provide value to you and you shout loud enough that they'll be brought back fairly soon. Cool. Is there anything else in particular, I think, or you think that we should discuss about the release, Ryan?
One thing, I don't know if everyone is using it, maybe just on the note about Studio is, and it's right there on your screen, how to run Studio from your own Prisma project. I'm not sure if you were even to run that right now in that demo project that you've got, we could see.
I somewhat intentionally didn't, because the experimental thing hit me hard when I was testing, and for some reason I couldn't run it. That's why
I haven't dug in too much to Studio, so sorry to put you on the spot there, but I think it's worth noting that that is a feature that is it's under an experimental flag, of course, as we see, but to launch Studio from your own Prisma workspace, that's what you want to get into there.
Exactly. And regarding that experimental flag, that maybe also kind of warrants a little bit of conversation around terminology, because actually, if you look into our documentation at the moment, you'll find two experimental labels right here on Prisma Migrate and Studio. But if you open up Prisma Client here, you'll find preview labels. So I think it's reasonable to ask kind of what is the difference between the two and how should you think about them? And the difference between the two is like fairly nuanced. And I talked upfront with our product team a little bit to make sure that I'm choosing the right words when explaining this. So first and foremost, most important thing about both terms is that they mean that these features are not yet considered production ready. So if you feel brave and if you have a non-mission critical application, then feel free to use them there. But we cannot yet take any guarantee for the stability of these features. So they both might have kind of significant bugs or performance issues. We have not battle tested them in the wild. Like that's really like what you should expect from both preview and experimental. The biggest difference between the two is that with preview features, the API and the overall functionality of the feature is expected to not really change anymore. So if we look at the aggregations preview feature, for example, then we are pretty sure that this is going to be the API that we're going to release for production. And the same for all the other like preview features here. We are fairly certain that this is going to be the API that will the features will have when they will be released into prod. With experimental, this is not necessarily the case. So in fact, Prisma Studio is a good example of that, because we now removed the tree view and the code view, which were two big features, but we probably won't include them in the initial kind of stable release that we're currently aiming for. So here, the experimental terminology was more appropriate because we already did remove kind of substantial features from the feature. We changed the developer surface that people get in touch with like when they're using it, and that's not to be expected for preview features. We still don't even we don't take the guarantee that it cannot happen for previews as well, but it's very unlikely, and typically the API will just stay the same. Does this make sense to you, Ryan? Like I know you also worked at Auth0 before. Do you have any experience around kind of release channels, release terminology from your time there?
Yeah, I mean, if there was terminology like this one when I was there, I just cannot remember at this point, I guess. I was trying to jog my memory to see if there's, if I can remember if we had flags like this. And at least in the area that I was working in, the specific product area that I was in, I don't recall us using this kind of thing. Maybe this kind of terminology is there now. Perhaps someone can go explore that. But in terms of like the sort of nuanced difference between the two, it's interesting. Like preview, I think this touches on like what the intent is. Like preview feels to be the more stable of the two flags that say, hey, it's not ready yet. Whereas experimental says this is a prototype, things could break. So I think those feel right to me. Those feel like the message is there, but it is tricky because you can easily get sort of confused between differences, what specifically they would be and what the particular nuance between them is. But they sound right to me, and I would expect that many product organizations are probably doing the same, if not the same, then similar kinds of flags like these.
Yeah, I mean, like the main point why we are doing this is because we want to get feedback for these features, and we need some way of actually like bringing these features out into the wild so that people can use them. But on the other hand, we like somehow have to label them and like somewhat make them opt in so that people don't accidentally start using them without being aware that they are not really ready yet. So I think
it's an interesting
background for why that's needed.
Yeah, and it's an interesting difference, I think, in a product organization that is open source first. Because if you're closed source, you can have just a beta flag behind like a new feature that shows up in like a web application or something like that, which is an all-encompassing beta flag, and arguably by the time it's going to land in the user's browser, the product team is pretty confident that it's not going to change that much. But if you're dealing with developer tooling and developer APIs in this case, and especially stuff that's open source, I think it certainly warrants these additional flags that have a lot more nuance between them.
Yeah, that's definitely right. Cool. Speaking of these different release terminology of these different release terms and release terminology, why not introduce another one? So,
yeah, sure.
What I want to show now is yet another kind of release stage, and it's actually a feature that has been requested a lot by a lot of different users, and that we are currently focusing on, and where we hopefully soon can share a first kind of stable version with you. But today I want to show you how it works already, so to give you a little bit of a taste. And what I'm talking about is a one-command schema migration. So if you've used Prisma Migrate before, you know that you have these two steps in your migration. You first have to run Prisma Migrate save in order to save a new migration on your file system. And then you run Prisma Migrate up to actually apply the migration against your database. And with the one command migration, we are introducing another way of changing your database schema that is primarily aimed for local development and for prototyping stages. So it's not really something that you should and you want to use in production, because there you want to have tighter control over your migrations, but it's something that might be really helpful during development. And the way how you can use it, and I'm actually just going to reuse the same project that I used initially here. And now I quickly have to look up the version where it's at. Give me 1 second. It's 2.4.0, and then it's a dev version. So I'm pulling that literally from one of our dev branches, which should really indicate that this is it might significantly change. It might be removed. It's really it's not even experimental, right? So it's very, very early for this features, but I still want to kind of tease it for those of you who are interested in such a functionality. So I'm going to open up my Prisma schema file, and for now I'm just going to create a new model in here. I'm going to call comment, and there's no relation for now. And now, in order to use the new feature, the new one command migration, I can run npx prisma. And at the moment, the one command migration is not under Prisma migrate, but under a different subcommand that's called Prisma schema. npx Prisma schema push is the command that you have to run here when you want to do this one command migration. because it's early, we haven't really thought about the output. But if I look into the database, reveal and finder again, and open it up in Table Plus, then we see that this new table has been created. So the migration did work. And you might ask, okay, what happens if I delete something where I had data? In fact, the behavior for that will be quite similar to what you're used to from Prisma Migrate if you've been using that. So I'm now deleting a couple of models, a couple of fields of my models where in the respective columns in the database, we already had some data. So if I now run the same command again, I'm getting a warning, and it tells me that I'm about to drop some columns and that there is data in there. So if I'm indeed in a prototyping or kind of local development stage, I don't really care about that, and I'll just add the force flag to confirm that I actually want to delete the data there. And now the one command migration has been done. Going back to Table Plus, and we see that on the post, the title and content fields are missing, and the name field is missing on user. So this is what we are currently working on. It's still super, super early. So you can start exploring this like functionality, but please expect it to potentially change significantly and also to be not stable. And this is a feature that is anyways not to be used in production. So please, please, please make sure to not install it on your CI servers or wherever you might want to use it.
That's a really cool addition, though. I think that's a lot of convenience for developers. Lots more. It'll be much more ergonomic, I think, to do your migrations once that is fully in place. And one thing that comes to mind on as we're talking about like these new features and the flags behind them and everything that would be worth mentioning is the cadence for releasing these new things. And what's our like release cadence, I guess? Like when do these releases come around? We've got 2.4, I believe 2.3 was 2 weeks ago. Do you want to speak a little bit to what developers can expect as we go on into the future and what we have planned for releases and how fast they come?
Yes, absolutely. So in general about the cadence, we're actually aiming for bi-weekly releases, and release day is typically on Tuesday. But you can already hear a little bit in my voice that this is, again, non-committing. So things might happen, things might go wrong. We might release on a Wednesday, on a Thursday, probably not on a Friday afternoon, but then again, if we then need to release, that's going to happen on a Monday. And that has happened in the past, actually, during the beta and the preview phases of Prisma 2. So that wouldn't be a big surprise if that happens at any point, but at least we're aiming to do it every 2 weeks and on Tuesdays. And if you want to know what's coming up, then I think actually the best way to check is via the Prisma roadmap. For those of you who haven't seen it, it's actually very informative and gets updated regularly by our product team. And it helps also us in developer relations to finally be able to communicate rough timelines about different features. So the features that we currently have already in preview that you can use with the preview flag are transactions, reintrospection, create or update on nested writes, selecting aggregations, distinct querying, middlewares, and ordering by multiple columns, as we talked about, but that's probably now not even in preview anymore, but this should be updated. Then we have a couple of more features coming up. These are in progress. And we have a planned column, a considering column, and a not doing column. And if you want to learn more about the terminology of these columns, you can check out the sequencing buckets here and their descriptions. So each of the these is typically associated with kind of a rough time frame where a certain feature can be expected if it's in that column at the moment.
Yeah, that's super cool that we've got that public facing. People can see what's coming, what's next. That's very cool. One thing that we could chat about, and this will be something to keep in mind for folks as they're looking into the future and new features are coming out, is the problem that I was having today, which thank you for helping me out with it, was I had an old version of the CLI installed globally. So maybe we could just we could reiterate the recommendation we have, and you linked me to a doc on this. You know, you've got this tempting option of just installing the Prisma CLI globally so that you can run your Prisma commands from wherever, whenever you want, but you can run into issues where you have conflicting versions. So I was running into an issue with this this new order by feature where it wasn't working properly. And the issue ended up being that even though I had everything new installed locally in this demo project that I was on, 2.4.1, everything was good there. I had 2.3 for the CLI installed globally. And when I was doing my Prisma generate stuff, it just wasn't generating the correct types for me. So make sure to, I guess, either keep your Prisma CLI always up to date if you're installing it globally, or the recommendation here is do it on a per project basis. And I think, Niko, you had some concrete examples of why that might be a good idea, especially if you're working across different projects locally, hey?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like what's super important just is to have your @Prisma CLI and the @Prisma client dependencies in sync. So you always want to make sure that this happens. And if you have multiple projects on your local machine and these are on different @Prisma client versions, and you have one globally installed version of the Prisma CLI, it's already clear that you're going to run into issues kind of sooner or later. So yeah, really make sure that this is installed locally in your project, typically as a development dependency. You don't need to deploy that to production, of course, but really having it per project where you can sync the CLI version with the client version is very much recommended. Cool. I think.
Why don't we chat about community projects?
Yeah, let's go for it. Have you seen the project that made it to the #1 on Hacker News? I think it was over the weekend actually, or like early in the week. I can open it on Slack in a second.
Yeah, I saw the tweet about it.
Okay.
I saw the Slack perhaps message about it, but I didn't check out the project itself, the app. I don't know too much about what it's all about.
All right. So it's by Michael, and in fact, I actually like chatted with Michael beforehand because I think the project was already live, or at least like it was kind of online already before, and was using GraphQl. And I chatted with Michael a little bit to help him with the upgrade process from GraphQl to Prisma, and I believe Nexus now. And a few days later, after he finished the upgrade, I saw that he launched this version, and it got 823 points on Hacker News, was the #1 there for I don't know how long, but for like quite a bit of time, I think. So like go and check it out. Big shout out for Michael and building an application on Prisma that made it to the front page of Hacker News. Very cool.
Excellent. Congrats to Michael.
That's what this looks like. And then, so this was an app that was built on top of Prisma, but we also have 2 very cool community projects to show that are not built on top of Prisma, but that help you, the developers using Prisma, with certain Prisma workflows. And the first one is the Prisma docs generator, and that's actually by Harshit, who's also an employee at the company, but who just spends his free time building these kinds of additional tools that you can use to help you with your Prisma workflows. And what you see here is that this is a Prisma documentation generator. So this will read your Prisma schema and generate an individual API reference for your schema. And that's really, really cool. I think while you can use auto-completion in your editor, and if you're using TypeScript, then you're maybe not too concerned with the API. But finally, having a good understanding of what all the input options, of what all the return types are specifically tailored for your project, I think is super valuable. Because if you look at what our kind of API documentation looks like at the moment, we don't really have that individual documentation for you. We just say, okay, here is a sample data model, and that's what we'll be using. But that doesn't really tell you anything about your API and your schema. You kind of have to map the things that we are writing here to your own models. So having this available will be a big, big help if you need to look up some API calls or input values.
Very cool. That looks like it'll be an awesome resource.
Yeah, we are actually considering, I think, to like maybe bake it into the product, or like maybe building something similar. But this for sure is an amazing first step into that direction. I had planned a little demo of it, but because we're already a little bit short on time, I'm going to skip it for now. I mean, here's a nice screenshot, I think, that gives a good impression of what the tool is about. So just go ahead and check it out yourself. You have the getting started instructions right here in the repo. And the last project that I want to give a quick shout out to is called Prisma Schema DSL. And what this is basically, it's an NPM package that lets you create your Prisma schema in code. So if you want, you could call it kind of a code-first approach for Prisma. Although this code-first and schema-first, it's not 100% the same as the terminology that is being used in GraphQL, for example, because there you also always talk about resolvers, and resolvers are a component that are completely missing in Prisma, of course. But it's still a way that provides you a couple of just like functions that you can use to build up your Prisma schema programmatically. And I think that's super cool. In fact, we are also thinking again about having something like this maybe sooner or later in Prisma itself, where we are thinking about having kind of a low-level Prisma SDK. I think there might even be an open issue for that. Let me quickly search here for Prisma SDK. Code first Prisma schema API. That's at least the issue that pretty much now has been resolved by this project here by Idan. So big shout out for the work on this project. Cool. I think this is it for the content that we wanted to discuss. How about we pick up 2 or 3 questions from the live chat and then call it a day, Ryan?
Yeah, that sounds good. And if anyone has been sitting on their questions, feel free to drop them in now. We'll take a look as we go through here. One that I just saw, which is of interest to me because I used to work in this field. I don't know if I was telling you about this, but before I got into programming, I was doing geomatics and GIS stuff, basically like digital mapping. And so there's a question, is post-GIS support on the way? Do we know anything about post-GIS support?
That's a good question. I don't know by heart, actually. So let's check if we find any issues. We certainly have an issue to support it already. But the thing about these kinds of database features is that while we don't have them baked into the Prisma client API yet, you're still, or it's still completely possible for you to actually use them. So if you need to use PostGIS in your application, then you can actually configure everything that you need for it on the database level, just with Postgres basically, and send your create table statements or like alter table statements to make sure that you're using the right features that you need from it. And then when it comes to querying it, you won't be able to query these types with Prisma Client necessarily, but what you can do is you can use raw SQL. And in fact, we do have an example I'm not exactly sure if it uses Postgres. I actually believe so. Yeah, it does. We actually have an example that shows you how to do exactly that. So in this example, we are implementing a couple of like REST API routes, and we are using query raw to query the geometric data from Postgres. So while it's not possible to use it with migrate, you can still configure it yourself on a database level and then query it with raw SQL.
Very cool. Yeah, and there was an answer actually in the chat. Drigger says work in progress on the roadmap. So that's I guess speaks directly to the PostGIS question there, but very cool. The other one I saw, whether it's on the way or not, is cascading deletes, and I think we have a doc on this, how to think about cascading deletes, and I know it goes into detail about what a cascading delete is, shows you how to set one up directly in your database, but what about directly through Prisma Client? What's the story for cascading deletes?
So that's a really good question, and again, one where I'm not 100% up to date. Let me just see if we have it on the roadmap. Cascade delete support. So it's in the planned column, which I think maps to kind of 3 to 6 months. But actually, cascading delete is an interesting feature because you can, of course, already use cascading deletes today in your application, because similar to Postgres, and like as you already mentioned, Ryan, you can just configure it yourself on a database level. And we have guides in the docs that explain you kind of step by step what kind of the different kind of options you have when you do that: restrict, cascade, no action, set null, set default. I think an interesting question about cascade deletes, and right now, I'm not 100% sure how we are thinking about this in terms of implementation, but in Prisma 1, for example, we also had cascading deletes. So we had this extra annotation that you could do on relations, kind of like an attribute in your schema, where you could say which strategy you wanted to use for cascading deletes. But the way how it was implemented in Prisma 1 was not that your configuration from the data model with that attribute would get mapped to the database, but instead, in the query engine of Prisma 1, we implemented our own cascading deletes. So we were not using the kind of native implementation by the databases, which also now caused quite a bit of confusion for people upgrading from Prisma 1 to Prisma 2, because it just works differently now. Now, if you want to do it today with Prisma 2, then you have to rely on the database level. And I'm not sure, when we're talking about the implementation, does this actually mean it's going to be implemented in the query engine as well? And we're, again, implementing our own cascading deletes. I know that this was at some point still, or again, a consideration. Or if we just implement it in a way to just map to the native data, or like SQL cascading deletes that you can configure in your database. An interesting question for our product team, I think, and maybe also one that we can pick up in our next live stream to discuss.
Yeah, that'd be cool. I just noticed now this box that's showing up, I think this is through StreamYard, that you click on a question and it shows up as an overlay, maybe. But there's a question.
I accidentally
what happens.
One of these comments that I'm seeing here as StreamYard, indeed. And I didn't actually realize that it showed up as I was talking about it. But yeah.
It's a good question. The one that you pulled up, though, can create some confusion. Can you do GraphQL and Prisma together without Nexus.js? And the answer is absolutely you can. You can use Prisma, wherever you are running a Node application, essentially. I don't know if that's maybe too liberal of a way to think about it, but if you're running Node and you can install Node modules, you can use Prisma, essentially. And, there are other clients that are work in progress, like the Go client, for example. However, so if you are wanting to do a GraphQL API, let's say you're building it with Node, let's say you're using maybe like Apollo server, you would set up your GraphQL API as you would, right? You set up your resolvers, you set up your model, your schema, and once you have that attached, you can, in your resolvers, call into your database via Prisma. And so you've got the type safety of Prisma in your resolvers, but if you use something like Nexus, then you've got additional benefits around type safety that will be very cool to use in your application. You can have type safety for your GraphQL API and type safety for your database as well. So it's a compelling reason to use Nexus with Prisma, but you aren't forced to by any means. You can use Prisma with a REST API, with a GraphQL API, basically any kind of API you want, or for many other reasons as well, just as long as you can install some node modules.
Absolutely. And to make that hyper clear, actually, we have this page in the docs that kind of lists different libraries, popular libraries that you would use to build out your GraphQL server from the GraphQL ecosystem. And again, to make it hyper clear, we have this column here, compatible with Prisma, and it says yes for all of them. So you can definitely use Prisma as your database client, as the way how your resolvers, GraphQL resolvers, talk to your database, no matter which of these tools you're using and in which combination. Whew. All right, Ryan, I think we aimed for 30 minutes. We now are at 50. So yes, I think that's a good point for us to wrap things up.
Yep, agreed. Yeah, so I guess we'll be doing this again, I'm sure, next release probably. So people maybe stay tuned for announcements on that on Twitter and elsewhere that you interact with us. And if there's any feedback too, if you've got any kind of feedback about what you might want to see in these streams in the future, anything that we should be adding or thinking about adding, please feel free to let us know. You can hit us up on the main Prisma channels or just individually on Twitter as well.
Cool. I just want to close off, remove the question here. Perfect. All right, then thanks everybody, and see you in 2 weeks.
All right, bye-bye.